Scales and practicing scales, let's face it, it's not exactly the most exciting topic that I can talk about, but it is an essential one. And I think that in jazz there are a few scales really which are really important to know. And of course, chief among them is the major scale, because everything that you're going to play often comes from the major scale. So what are some ways in which you can practice this, which are really going to help you internalize it and help you develop proficiency with it? This video is going to go through a few of the top ways which I found to practice major scales, both in my own playing and with my students as well. And this is from an ebook which I've just released called Beginner Jazz Guitar Improvisation. And in that ebook, basically, I say that you don't really have to know a bunch of scales and a bunch of modes to get started with jazz improv, and the major scale is one of them. You've just got to know it really well, basically. So if you want to check out that ebook and help support these videos, that's listed and linked to in this video as well, if you just look in the description, Beginner Jazz Improvisation. So let's get into a few of the exercises which you can use to practice major scales. Okay, so the first one, I think, which is really good to do with any scale, is practicing it on one string. So let's take the major scale, for example. Okay, so typically you probably know the major scale with having the root on the 6th and also with the root on the 5th string, which is great. But in order to really understand the notes and kind of the intervallic structure of the scales, it's a really good thing, I think, to practice these on individual strings. So if we start with the C note on the 1st fret of the B string, you can play the entire scale with one finger like that, and it really gets you to think about the notes more, because you can't use a prescribed pattern. Now obviously, if you're working on a more difficult scale like a half whole diminished scale or something like that, then that's much easier to kind of see how that strings out when you see it on one string. Whereas if you play like a fingering for that scale, it can kind of be a little bit messy to begin with when you're kind of trying to just understand it. So the first way in which I recommend that you practice major scales to develop fluency is by playing them on single strings. Now of course, this one works out for the key of C, being in C major, because there's a C note right there. But you can do this starting on any note of the scale. Like if you're practicing a C major scale starting on the E string, it's not obviously going to be strictly a major scale, then it's actually going to be an E Phrygian mode because you're starting on an E. But just to get an idea of where the notes of C major are, I think it's a good idea to kind of go through all of the strings with various different scales, because really, I mean, the patterns and the useful fingerings are good for improv, but realistically, you need to understand the notes within them, and you don't need to, hopefully you're not going to feel confined to a pattern. Okay, hopefully you can use both of these things together, where you can use a good pattern, but you've got a really good strong internal visualization of what's in that, rather than just like a memorized scale pattern. So that's the first one, scales on single strings. The second one is called tetrachords, a tetrachord. Now what is a tetrachord? A tetrachord is just a 4-note pattern, and many of you will have probably seen my Coltrane patterns video, where that's kind of like a 1, 2, 3, 5 scale pattern like this. But this is a different tetrachord. Really, the tetrachord, obviously the tetra just means 4, like the game Tetris. So what we're doing is thinking, if we take the key of C as well, we like the Canadian key of C, it's a good key for us to think in. So the tetrachord we're going to be looking at is just 4 notes, C, D, E and F. All right, that's our first tetrachord, and that, you could think of that as being as a major tetrachord, because the intervals within that, tone from C to D, there's a tone, from D to E, there's another tone, from E to F, there's a semitone. So you've got tone, and then tone, semitone. Okay, tone, tone, semitone. 4 notes and 3 intervallic distances between each of those 4 notes. Why am I telling you this? Because look, you can do the same thing again. You can start on G, and you can think of another tetrachord starting on G. Tone, tone, semitone. Okay, and obviously you're playing the high C note when you're playing that as well, which technically is not really in a C major scale, but obviously it gives you the complete 2 octaves then. So you've got one major tetrachord, just say that again in C, and then you've got another major tetrachord starting on G where you've got tone, 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 semitone. So that's 2 tetrachord stems together, but of course going beyond that, you just got to think again, tone, tone, semitone, and you can kind of keep this going and make scales that way. So it can be useful, especially as you get onto other scales, like for example, minor scales, for example, like a natural minor scale. Okay, the first 4 notes of the natural minor scale are the same first 4 notes as harmonic minor scale. So obviously it helps you see a bigger connection between all the scales as well. Okay, so that's the next way in which you can practice scales, is with tetrachords. The third way is using cycles, the cycle of fourths. And the cycle of fourths is a really good way in which to practice any scale or arpeggio or chord sequence, because many jazz progressions move in the sequence of fourths. So really all you've got to do on the guitar, it's a very easy pattern, because you can see C goes to F, and a fourth above F is B flat, and we have this nice kind of symmetrical pattern which goes across the neck until you come full circle at C. So if you're doing, let's say, the major scale with this, you could do C major scale, starting with the root on the 6th string, then you go to F major scale with the root on the 5th string, then B flat major scale with the root on the 6th string, E flat major scale with the root on the 5th string, A flat major scale with the root on the 6th string, D flat major scale with the root on the 5th string. Sorry, it's hard for me to play and talk at the same time, but eventually you'll come full circle. You go to G flat, and then you're going to go to B, and then I'd suggest jumping up 12 frets, because the jazz police don't like us using open strings, so it's good that we keep to fretted notes. So it's fine to do the octave jump there, and then you will come full circle at C. Now, of course, when you do this, to ensure that you cover the totality of the fingerboard, you want to make sure that you do B major scale, you start on the 7th fret, so you cover the sequence of fourths this way, then you've got everything covered. All right, so that's how you can do that with the sequence of fourths. So that's another way in which you can practice scales. The next way is to see scales in single octaves. So far, I guess in the last example, I was just using 2 octaves there. And, the last example, you can practice single octaves in the sequence of fourths as well. So I think why it's good to do this is because as guitar players, we can learn these massive fingerings. And then in lessons and things, I can say, okay, can you play the second half of that single octave fingering for me, please? And then someone's kind of going through the scale like this, and they don't know where the other C is, and they're completely lost. So it's good to have things in single octaves as well, so you can see them, because in jazz, chord changes move pretty quickly. If you're playing a 2-5-1 in C or something like that, more often than not, we don't even have a chance to grab a full single octave scale. So, that's probably, it's a really good idea that we can see short snippets of this scale rather than always seeing a cumbersome 2-octave scale, because if you're playing 2-5-1 in C, and if you're going to go for, say, a 2-octave Dorian scale, by the time you're halfway through that, everyone else has moved on to G. So if you can see things in single octaves, that's going to be much more useful in the long run. So that's a good thing there. So really, how can you learn these in single octaves? So you can play, that's a good way to play C major scale, because you can use that finger pattern. Then you can move the same finger pattern, and the finger pattern there, it's basically 2, 4, 1, 2, 4. I can start on the 5th string, play the same thing, so 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4. So there's, okay. You can do the same thing on the D string, but because of the tuning, you've got to slide your index finger up and play like that. Okay, so effectively you can have 3 different fingerings, essentially using the the same fingers. So does that make sense? 3 different positions using more or less the same fingering, I guess would be a better way to say that. The only reason why we don't start on the 3rd string is because it really does look a lot different. It doesn't really correspond with the other fingering, so you've got to learn a separate fingering when it starts on the 3rd string. Okay, so that's one way in which you can do that. You can also learn a backwards fingering for each of these scales, so that's kind of a nice 4 finger per fret kind of thing there that keeps everything going that way. But I call them a backwards shape because they typically start with your pinky or ring finger. So you can start with the pinky and then you can play the same notes and then go backwards. Okay, and that is a nice thing to do because if you think about it, you play the root on the 6th string, root on the 5th string. This one here covers kind of that middle ground in between the 2 positions. Okay, and once again, this is a movable fingering. So there's a C major scale there. Use some open strings there, don't tell the jazz police. But of course on each of those 3 bass strings which I was demonstrating before, you can do a backwards fingering and it more or less has the same pattern. You just, like I said, when you get to the root on the D string, you've got to kind of shift the top notes because of the tuning of the guitar. So that's kind of single octave fingerings for you. And the good thing about that is that you can kind of like stitch these together to form scales as you need them. So for example, you can maybe do like 1 C major 7 backwards fingering, and then you can play another C major fingering, you've got the 2 together. You can play, obviously everyone's kind of go-to shape of this C major scale fingering is to do this, which is good, but you can do maybe 1 single octave fingering here, and now because you'll know them in single octaves, you can start the other one here, and you can go across as well. Okay, so you basically have 2 shapes. You have one that you'll typically know, and then you'll have one that you can vary. I can play it right, play it a bit slower. So that's, as you can see with these scales, I think it's good to have a few things that you can just kind of create on the spot, and I'm trying to workshop this so you can kind of get the idea as to what you need to do. Okay, so that's one method there, practicing them as single octaves so you can string them together. Probably the last way in which I'm going to show you how you can practice scales is doing 3 note per string scales. So I'm going to shift keys. We've been in C for a while, so I'm going to go to the key of G now for this. So again, going back to that 2 octave scale, you can play this as a 3 note per string scale as well, and that looks like that. Okay, so I'm just basically, it's a much bigger stretch with the left hand, and finger wise I'm doing 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4, and then I'm going to a more familiar shape right there. Okay, you can do those with the root on the 5th string as well. That was a D major scale. No, it wasn't. I was playing, no it was, sorry, D major scale. Same scale, root on the 5th string. Okay, so that's another good one you can do as well, just mainly for technique. I can't say that I've ever really used this one myself in improvisation. I know that there's probably a few rock legato players that may have used this one, but this one for me tends to be more for building technique, for increasing that stretch in my left hand so that I can play more stretchy chords without too much difficulty. Okay, so that's that one, 3 note per string. Sorry, that's not the last one. There's one more scale exercise that I'm going to share with you as well. And this last one is covering the range of the guitar. So once again, going back to one of these familiar 2 octave fingerings. Now they're good because they obviously they give you the sound of the scale. But I think what is useful, I think, to do is this thing where you go up to the highest available note in that fingerboard position. So if we're in 3rd position here, obviously we're going to start on a C, and now I want you to try and go up to the highest available note without jumping, without changing your hand. So that should be the high A note right there, fret number 5. And And then when you come back down, I want to see if you can go to the lowest note in that position. All right, so I'll say that one more time. So you go up to the highest note in the position, and then on the way down, you go to the lowest note. All right, and this is just going to give you totality of the fingerboard. All right, it means that if you're in C and you're improvising in this kind of position, and then you know all the notes which you can kind of get, and there's no, hopefully, well, if you are in C again, then it's like seeing the white notes on the piano. Okay, so that's that scale position right there. You can do this with all of the different positions. Say, for example, this is kind of that missing link major scale. If I can play it. All right, so you can do the same thing here. Obviously, the highest note in this position is going to be a C. So it's the coming down you've got to watch. So that will finish on the low A note there. All right, so you get the idea. You can do this with all the different scale positions. And the tab and audio examples for these are in the book, Introduction to Jazz Improv, if you want to check that out. So there you go. That's a bunch of different major scale exercises for you. I hope that you've enjoyed them and you found them useful. If you have, then I'd really appreciate it if you could give this video a like. And if you want to support the videos and make a donation, I have a virtual tip jar that you can access on PayPal to show your support, and all donations are greatly appreciated as well. So thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful, and I'll see you next time.